back, everybody, to another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. Thanks for tuning in, however and from wherever in the world you are tuning into us today. My name is Caleb. I'm on the Startup Junkie team and joined by my Startup Junkie co-hosts, Jeff Amerine and Victoria Dickerson. How are y'all today?
Great.
Doing well.
Glad to be here.
And we are excited to be joined by our new friend, Chris Heivly. Chris is the co-founder of MapQuest. He's the managing director of Build the Fort. And we're going to jump into a conversation with him today. Chris, how's it going?
Not too bad. Apologize. I have my sexy cold voice going. So you guys should all be excited about that. It's a beautiful sunny day here in North Carolina, and we're going to have some fun talking about startups and founders and communities and the like.
Well, it is a beautiful day in Northwest Arkansas as well. And speaking of North Carolina, we've got Duke in town tonight playing our Razorbacks. And I'm going to admit I've been thinking about that all day today, all morning.
Yeah, well, I didn't even like college basketball until I moved down here, and now you don't have a choice. Right. So I root for all of them equally. Well, a little Tar Heels more than a little bit of Duke, and definitely both over State. But good luck today.
Yeah, we'll take that. We'll take that as long as you're not like a Blue Devil, Blue Blood.
No.
Well, Chris, we usually jump into kind of the origin story. We'll start with Genesis. Tell us about Chris. Tell us from the beginning.
Geez, I feel like this is a Steve Martin moment. Any references. Maybe Jeff gets it.
That's a good reference for those of us of a certain age.
Yeah, exactly. Born outside of Philadelphia, spent my first 21 years there before colleges started getting involved. Was just an average student. It turns out that I like to build things, not necessarily, like cars, but I did, have to repair a car here and there. You have that figured out mentality. Limped a car and myself down to the University of South Carolina for a graduate degree in geography. So for the crew here, probably the first geographer you've not only had on your podcast, but probably that you've met. Pretty accurate.
Yep.
There may have been one other.
I would say so.
Maybe
one other. We'll lead with who was the most famous geographer in the world. And there was a small reference in the start of our conversation. So who's the most famous geographer in the world?
Couldn't tell you.
Steve Martin.
Basketball. UNC.
Beats me.
No,
Michael Jordan was a geography major at UNC Chapel Hill.
I was going to make a track.
I figured he majored in like fashion and apparel since he done so well with shoes.
It's a good little fact.
Well, if you've seen the movie Air, I think it was his mother that deserves all the credit for that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Great movie.
Yeah. So, I'm a geography nerd, somehow stumbled into it. Like most of us, you take one class and your eyes light up and you can't get enough of it. I'm on the older side. So, this is the late 70s, early 80s. And a weird thing is, guys, I learned how to write code back then. It was Fortran and BASIC, really simple stuff. Desktop computers just started landing on our desks within a year. And my goal was to figure out how to marry those two things together. And, for all the startup junkies out there, some of the best ideas are when you marry two things that haven't been married before. I guess that's how that finished that sentence. So that's kind of the start of my life. And for most of the next probably 15 to 20 years in government and private enterprise, I figured out how to make that work. And the culmination of that was MapQuest, launched in 96. I'm giving you the quick version.
That's amazing. And talk about a little bit about the trajectory of MapQuest. I think I may have known some of the other people who were in that sort of early GIS map stage. So talk a little bit about how all that came together and the trajectory of it.
Yeah, well, Jeff, you used the term GIS, and I sometimes share with people that I was in the GIS before we called it GIS.
Right.
I'll interrupt. What is GIS?
geographic information systems. So every county, state, has GISs that look at, that map your, all your houses and all that kind of stuff. And it's how they manage utilities. And that was all boring to me. But my view is let's take the same kind of technology and see if we can apply it to consumers. And so I joined a map company after working for the US State Department with the aim of automating their map production process. And in that kind of journey, we started stumbling upon, hey, what if we could create some directions, using a computer? And what if we could put that in every auto club like AAA? Caleb and Victoria, if not your parents, certainly your grandparents, when you guys made the big trip from Arkansas down to Orlando, you went to AAA and got this thing called a triptych, which gave you directions. And so we said, why don't we do that better? And we did that in the late 80s, early 90s, and we sold that to every auto club, including AAA. And then by 93, we learned that the desktop computers that we were all buying was coming with a CD-ROM, and now we could load tons of that data. And so we created the first, consumer CD kind of app is by today's standards. And we did that in 93 and was very successful. And then the next technology that was starting to emerge was the internet. And that's when things really took off. And so the beauty of all that, guys, is that, I know, you guys are, you're not in New York or the Valley or Seattle or Boston. Is that we did all of that in the high-tech metropolis of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Home to about 125,000 Amish people.
Right. And some fantastic pretzels, right?
Yeah, pretzels and big family style dinners, right? Yeah.
Very cool. That's a great story.
We were map geeks, map and geeks. You get it. So.
I can't speak to the AAA downloading directions, but I can say probably the last generation to go on MapQuest and print off turn-by-turn directions before going on a road trip. I think probably part of the last guard on that.
Well, the funny thing is here we created a kind of before that you would buy atlases and paper maps of, states, and sometimes they were free and sometimes you paid for them at the gas station. So here we are creating a digital version, which should eliminate all the paper. And I think we killed more trees with what all of us printing out directions that we did. Then anyway, it worked out.
There's just like a nostalgic rite of passage around printing off the MapQuest turn-by-turn directions before like driving to St. Louis for a Cardinals game or driving down to Florida for the beach. There's like, if you don't have that printed off stack of MapQuest turn-by-turn directions, like how are you even going to get there?
Yeah, we all lived by Rand McNally and the hope that you didn't miss the friggin' exit.
Well, interesting enough, Jeff, is that after MapQuest, I went and joined Rand McNally as the president and started a whole online division in my hopes that I would kind of help, save that brand, but maybe too little, too late.
And they've kind of turned into a private equity company now, McNally.
That is correct. The family held it for many years, sold it to a bunch of investors, maintained a small portion for a while, and then later had to put it in a bankruptcy, and a private equity group, two different private equity groups ended up selling it. I don't even know anybody that does works there. It was 1,000 people when I was there, and
wow.
Probably about 180 million in revenue, which I can't imagine it's even, if it's 20, I'd be surprised,
Well, let's change gears a little bit.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
For a second, Caleb and Victoria, Rand McNally made paper maps. And if you've never seen one, what I want you to do when you go home for Christmas is I want you to get in the back seat of your dad or mom's car. And behind the driver's seat, there'll be a pouch. And I want you to stick your hand in there. And I will bet you that you will find a paper map.
Hey, like Caleb said, we're the last generation that used that. So I remember exactly.
Yeah.
My siblings, maybe not, but I remember.
Talk a little bit about some of your other startup and investing ventures, Chris. I mean, after you've had your own successful ventures, you've been senior executive, you're in the startup scene. You've done some ecosystem building. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, now you're getting to my passion today. So, every entrepreneur knows, and if anybody's been doing it for more than a couple of years, and if you've ever had any real success, you know that your success is based on the backs of the people that helped you. And it's just the nature of this thing is that you get help, right? And I think the best entrepreneurs seek help and are more, self-aware and more vulnerable and put themselves out there. And so, like many people, I just, started helping others, and sometimes it was investing and sometimes it was just my time. And, fast forward, I spent time in Lancaster, I spent time in Washington, D.C., I spent time in Chicago. Turns out that Northwest Arkansas and Chicago, the upper Midwest, is kind of cold during the winter. Who knew? Found myself in North Carolina just to get some more sun, and was starting to bounce around the Raleigh-Durham startup scene about 13, 14 years ago. And there's a lot of, like many regions, there's a lot of assets, but they just didn't seem to be kind of coalescing in a way that made it a, productive kind of, Valley, New York, Seattle, Austin, Texas kind of place. And at the same time, I was reading about Y Combinator and Techstars, and that fueled my ADD perfectly. And I said to myself, well, if doing one is fun, getting involved in 10 at a time should be a complete blast. And so got very well connected to the Techstars folks, David Cohen and Brad Feld, and they shared with me their whole recipe and roadmap, and off I ran, starting my own accelerator in 2010 and again in 2012.
Fantastic. And, a lot of sort of seminal work there that Brad Feld did in startup communities, where he talked about for venture ecosystems to be successful, it can't kind of be command directed. It has to be entrepreneur led. I always kind of joke because occasionally there'll be very well-intended people that are kind of like, thou shalt have entrepreneurship. And they build the building and there's no ecosystem that's been created, and they're trying to figure out how to fill this thing up. And so we took a lot of inspiration from some of that early work in startup communities, and we've kind of written our own book that talks about creating startup junkies and building sustainable venture ecosystems in unexpected places, a little different than even Boulder and some of the areas where we operate. But yeah, talk a little bit about your experience, why it's so important to have entrepreneurs that have been in the trenches in the front of these movements.
Yeah. Well, geez, now we're really getting to my sweet spot. So thanks for leading us there. I was lucky enough to meet David and Brad, circa 2009. And I tell people where David kind of taught me the best practices of running an accelerator at the time, Brad, I think, not mistakenly, but not necessarily on purpose, this is before he had written Startup Communities, kind of outlined this kind of mindset about how I could approach not just the accelerator, but the role that you would play inside your ecosystem. And like a good networking person, I stayed in contact with these guys over the years. But, when Startup Communities came out, it just felt like a Bible. And my business partner and I deconstructed it. We literally built spreadsheets and models over some of the things and just tried to apply some of that thinking. And, so we had kind of like our model or the way we would organize ourselves or the way we would decide the kind of things we would get involved in. And then we had the mindset that Brad had injected into us. And I tell Brad that he's kind of like our region's grandfather from a genealogical point of view, because he kind of injected that in me. And then I turned around and, it was to my personality as well to kind of be very give first. And I'm not shy, so I'm happy to kind of lead things and stand up and fill gaps. And in doing so, really embraced, what he calls the Boulder thesis. Raleigh-Durham today, it just continues to grow. I consider it a top 10, 15 ecosystem. We've been at it for a good 10 or 15 years. There was tons of assets and work that people had done before. But, what myself and a small group did is just start to kind of embrace that mindset. And part of that was making sure that entrepreneurs' voices were heard, obviously just not my own, but others. And I don't know whether we were lucky or good or, smart, or just the right people at the right time. But when we kind of filled that leadership kind of void or gap, we all kind of came at it from the right perspective. And so I think that's the secret sauce of, in our case, Raleigh Durham, and what I try to then use and share those stories, in my consulting work. As you know, a few years later, I got bored again and reached out to those guys and just was interested in seeing what they were doing. And the next thing you know, the three of us, David Cohen, Brad Found, and I decided to build a consulting practice based on the work I'd done in Raleigh Durham, the work they'd done in Boulder, and all those little touch points that they had in his book, which was just a fantastic opportunity. Always a great opportunity. You get to work with people smarter than you. And really, so my last 6 years has just been figuring out kind of this model. And I wrote a companion book to his second book, Startup Community Way, written by Brad and Ian Hathaway. Ian worked for me for a few years as we built this consulting practice. They kind of took the science and the model, and then I took a field guide. And I know I'm on a long rant now, but you addressed one of the key things, which is this is the very nature of being an entrepreneur. And being an entrepreneurial community is one of disruption, one of discovery, is a process of knowns and unknowns, and more unknowns than knowns. And with the best of intent and with the best of motivation, city leaders many times find people to lead this charge, and they're command and control, and they're going to say, it's the same approach they used to building the Fine Arts Center, right? And we all know, and your audience knows, the last thing entrepreneurs want to happen is that someone tell them what to do and how to do it.
That's why they became entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
exactly. So sorry for that long road to where we got.
No, that was great. And it's just, we're definitely co-conspirators for sure. But I was just chuckling a little bit because, again, and not to diminish, you need the municipalities and you need the funders and you need all these people involved. But a lot of times they try to fit things in neat little buckets and assume that, well, we don't want any overlap and we don't want any fuzzy edges. And I try to remind them that this process of experimentation that we have to go through to create a viable ecosystem is going to require some overlap. It's going to require some fuzzy boundaries. Everything is not going to fit into a neat regimental bucket as if the British Army were running the empire again. It's just not. There's going to be these things that cause some rubs occasionally, things that don't work. It's a process of experimentation. Why would the process of building the ecosystem be any different than the process of building a viable venture? It isn't.
Yeah. The parallels are amazingly parallel.
Exactly.
One of the things I do, Jeff, and all the consulting work I've done, and I probably visited 75 to 100 cities and done deep dive on probably 30, and 15 became major kind of consulting, where we spent 3 months to 3 years, in the community, disrupting, connecting, doing all the things we do. The observation that we came to, and Ian deserves, I think, most of the credit for finding the science. And then Brad and I and Ian really kind of mashed at it, pulled at it. The basis for our view is around systems theory. And in systems theory, there's either 3 or 4 types of systems. But along this continuum from simple to chaotic are 2 systems, complicated and complex. And though they're synonyms in the dictionary, in systems theory, they couldn't be more opposite. And so the idea, and anytime anybody wants to really dive into this, just all you have to do is ping me and I'll go crazy. But the idea is those people can't help it because they're complicated systems thinkers. They've built and mastered complicated muscles. And complicated systems are like sending a rocket to the moon, where you have to put things in buckets. You have to reverse engineer and engineer outcomes. You have to have high structure and handoffs that are perfect, right? And so the people that get to what I call the power brokers, when they get to that stage, And someone, either they're maybe the president of the chamber, or they're in charge of economic development at the state or city or county, or they've just been a power broker, maybe, former SVP of the bank. And someone says, would you help us with this effort? So with no judgment and all understanding, they bring the muscles that made them successful. And so when people ask me what I do, I said, well, in most cases, in the last 6 years in this consulting, what I say is my first job is to tell them that though I appreciate and those muscles were perfect for this part, the previous part of their journey, for the next part of the journey, we're going to need to build new muscles. And you're going to need to build a new mindset. And it has to be more of a complex mindset, which is more about experimentation and iteration, more about guidelines than rules, more about creating environments where people smash together and collide, where you don't know what the outcomes are going to be, and to get comfortable with the uncomfortable, or you said the fuzzy edges. And so about half the people, when I explain this to them, it usually takes a couple hours and a few examples, about half the people, guys, it's like a weight is lifted off their shoulder. They're like, you mean I don't have to find the answer? I'm like, yeah, because there isn't an answer. About half of them hold on for dear life and said, sorry, we're going to engineer the shit out of this thing.
Oh, it's so good.
Well, you've talked a little bit already about like the importance of mentors in your own life and your own journey. And as you're going through these consultations with founders, entrepreneurs, as they're in their journey, can you talk a little bit about mentorship, how to find it, how to find a good mentor, how it's impacted you in your journey, and kind of the advice that you give to founders?
Thank you so much, Victoria, because, this is like my battle cry. And I mentioned that I'm older, so I'm soon to be 64. I have the energy and smarts of a 40-year-old and the, humor of a 12-year-old, just to kind of place that all in context. I say that because it wasn't until I was around 50 when I started this in Raleigh, Durham, this quote unquote networking thing, that I really found my gold. And I tell everyone this story. I had heard some people talk about how to network, but I wasn't in a position to need to do it. I was new to the area. I was thinking about, Y Combinator and Techstars. And I said, I better know every entrepreneur, every investor, and every kind of support lawyer, accountant, right? And so I went and had 275 meetings in 5 months. No exaggeration. Busy. That's 5 or 6 a day. I started taking Fridays off so I could make notes of what the hell I had just done the previous 4 days and do my follow-ups. Every one of those was a warm introduction. And I really found the power of what that brings, not just for me, but for others. And if I can go off on a tangent, and I'll come back for a second, the rules of networking, first of all, we need a new word for it because people think networking is a transaction. It's not, it's a connection. And I found the value in connecting with people and asking them 2 questions, being curious about what they were doing and asking what they're working on, ask them what they're stuck on and asking if there's any way I can help them, and then doing that. And what happened in that is that I helped other people and then other people helped me. And as we go forward, whether I'm standing up a new event, whether I'm helping someone who's looking for a new salesperson, whether, I'm trying to connect 2 founders who I think would enjoy each other's, kind of entrepreneurial fellowship. That's what I do. And that number is probably close to 5,000 people in the last 10 years that I've met one-on-one with. What I tell founders is that the idea that you can sit in your office or your garage and figure out all the answers and have enough time and money to find their product market fit and hopefully start to scale their company, I don't think that happens anymore. And if it does, it's luck, not smarts. To close the gap between success and failure, you have to use your network, and your network is your community. And every community has a group of people like the 4 of us who put ourselves out there and say, how can we help? And if not me, I can introduce you to someone else. And though we all do mentorship, and there's lots of programs for mentorship, I believe the more powerful mentorship is that one-on-one that happens over a cup of coffee or when you bump into someone at a beer social or whatever it is, right? It can be organized, it can be serendipitous, but that's where the gold comes from. And so that's, to me, the heart of what a community, that's why I'm into community now, because I've realized that a community helps you go faster, smarter, better. And that, and in this day of social media where everything's, texting and, we don't call or talk to people or bump into people, I really think that's the heart of great startup communities is that connection and those meaningful connections.
Absolutely. And I've seen that just in the Northwest Arkansas community, where it is that genuine support, that genuine, I want to help you. And if I can't be the best person, then let me connect you to someone that can be. And I've seen that in our community. I'm sure you've seen that in your own, but entrepreneurs want that for themselves. And so it's natural that they would give that back to other entrepreneurs. So I would wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, it's funny. You said entrepreneurs want that. The entrepreneurs that have been around doing it want that, because not only are they giving, but they're going to pick up nuggets that are going to help them in whatever stage of journey they're at. You're never, as we all know, we're never done learning and figuring out new ways to do things, whether it's acquiring customer, retaining customer, using tools, or best practices. What do angel investors think today? I can tell you it's different than they thought 5 years ago, or different than they thought even maybe 2 years ago. And so to me, if you're a good entrepreneur, a new entrepreneur, you're going to lean into a community. You're going to build a network of people. You're going to find those 5 to 8 that you're kind of call on and meet every couple weeks, months, certainly when you need it, and just to stay connected. And so, like, new entrepreneurs sometimes don't. It's up to us to explain that to them. This is how that game is played, right? This is how you save time and money. So please, lean into that. Don't think you got to sit there and figure everything out before you open your mouth.
And you have
Absolutely.
to get some of them past the sort of concept of, well, I can't talk to anybody about my idea because somebody will steal it.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
And you hear that particularly with people that are very junior, haven't been through it before. And you think, well, I normally lead with, there's an 8 billion to 1 chance that your idea is really not novel.
Yeah.
And the game is won by execution. And you can only get to execution by talking to people that can help you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of that simple. And if you can get them past that and they realize that I can't do this alone, I really need other people, then the magic, I think, can begin to happen.
Yeah, it's funny. I should dig into this. There's some old like Chinese parable story about the grains of rice. And, you drop them in a pile and they kind of build up. And at some point, one more grain of rice in the whole pile, And so is it that last piece of rice that's caused that? Or is it all those little pieces of rices that had a role to play in that made that thing happen? And that's kind of the idea of complex systems, is we can't engineer if you and I could engineer, a Facebook in every city, we wouldn't be talking now. We'd be replicating that over and over again, right? So there must be, variables and things that are unknown. So I kind of use that to tell new entrepreneurs, like, guys, you don't know where that spark's going to come from, where that one customer or that one little product thing or that one little thing that you discovered because all of a sudden someone said something differently the way than you've heard it before. So why don't you leave yourself open to as many of those little pieces of rice as possible in order to create, the outcome that you want?
Chris, the land the plane question that we always ask at the end of the episodes is, if you could go back in time to starting this whole journey, whatever point in time you want to pick, what piece of advice would you give your younger self?
2 things. One is lean in sooner. When I left college, I didn't even know what an entrepreneur was. I didn't know you could start your own business. I thought businesses were already there. So get in sooner. I don't think I have to tell most of our audience that, because it's now very much, a thing that's known. But I would have gotten in sooner, and I would have taken more chances earlier. And then the second thing is, and a related question I get asked all the time, would you change anything? In every one of the businesses I was involved in, I would spend more time on customer and customer discovery than I would on product. I like to build things, even if it's a service, even if it's on paper. And in every case, I wish I would have spent as much time meeting with customers from new businesses that I was starting to existing businesses that I got parachuted into as the CEO or CEO, I wish I would have spent more time with customer. It's everything, right? And the best entrepreneurs, don't just sit in their laboratory building shit.
Yeah,
very good.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. That was a really great piece of feedback, and I think our audience would love to hear that. So we appreciate you coming on, and stay in touch. We hope to see you in Northwest Arkansas soon.
Chris, one final. Where can our audience find out more about you or what you're currently working on?
Well, thanks for asking, Jeff. So I do have a website that I'm fixing today. It looks like all the images just stopped working. Why does that even happen? That's at heivly.com, HEIVLY.com. I blog weekly. I have an email newsletter, probably 70% about community and 30% for entrepreneurs, but there's a good 500 some blog posts on there. And I've recently written a second book. We're starting a series under the Build the Fort mindset, which is how to simplify things. First one is Build the Fort, how to start anything. That's for entrepreneurs. Second one, released in April this year, is Build the Fort, the Startup Community Builders Field Guide. That's for everyone in your community. Everyone should read it. And it's just how to kind of make your community better for the betterment of both the community and, of course, to you. And that's the best way to find me.
Perfect. Thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Take care.
Chris.
Have a great day.
Hey, Chris.
Ecosystem builders, entrepreneurs, chambers of commerce, mayors. If you're interested in taking your economic future into your own hands, we've got a book that can help you. Creating Startup Junkies, Building Sustainable Venture Ecosystems in Unexpected Places is the guide. It's a little bit inspiration. It's a little bit toolkit. What it will allow you to do is take your economic future into your own hands and build a sustainable small business, innovation, and entrepreneurial ecosystem in your backyard. If you'd like to hear more, check out creatingstartupjunkies.com. The Startup Junkie podcast reaches over 100 countries and has had over 100,000 downloads. If you're interested in reaching some of the most motivated and engaged innovators and entrepreneurs on a worldwide basis, give us a shout.